Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to another Sociology of Media Voices series. Today we are going to look at a very important topic, something to coincide with International Disability Awareness Day that we need to explore further in all facets of government in health reform, and we're going to be speaking today with Andrew Bretherton. And Andrew is a unique human being. He is a strong unionist activist. He has written numerous pieces, has appeared in numerous documentaries, and is someone who is living with a condition which is abbreviated to ME. And I'm going to find it difficult to pronounce, but I'm going to give it a go. And that is myalgic I knew this would happen. I can't even pronounce the second word, but I'm going to put it straight over to Andrew. And we also have today Christina, who's his support worker who works closely with Andrew. So it's over to Andrew. Welcome to our series, and it's over to you, Andrew. Please first, let's start by what is ME?
Thanks, Ricky. So ME, which is the abbreviation for myalgic encephalomyelitis, is a condition that affects the, myalgic meaning muscle, encephalo meaning brain, myel meaning spinal cord, and itis meaning inflammation. So it's a whole body condition. It's an invisible disability that not many people have a very good understanding of, that is sometimes begrudgingly called chronic fatigue syndrome, which I don't think does justice to the condition, as, you know, fatigue is only just one symptom of what we suffer. For example, I struggle mostly with a lot of the cognitive and gastrointestinal effects of the illness. I still obviously get fatigued. I'm quite housebound with ME, but I wouldn't say fatigue's like the only or main symptom of the condition, which is why I prefer using ME or ME and CFS. So.
I was actually quite interested, Andrew. I was just looking at one of the websites that you've involved in, and it says that there's an estimated 92,000 people to close to almost 500,000 people with chronic fatigue syndrome, as well as ME or CFS-ME. Why do we not hear much about it, this condition?
Unfortunately, a lot's to do with public perception and outdated guidelines in Australia. Currently, we have guidelines in Australia that haven't been updated since 2002, and although we have strong evidence of like a biological component to the illness coming from, say, Griffith University, then Melbourne University, and La Trobe University with Paul Fisher and those guys, there's been this kind of perception from what we like to call the BPS, so the biopsychosocial model, that are trying to frame the illness as a psychiatric condition or a somatoform disorder. So unfortunately, a lot of the press or a lot of the information out there are incorrectly stating that the condition is a psychological condition rather than a physiological condition. So this is why I've been advocating to promote, well, you know, it is a biological condition. And yeah, there's been a few issues. There was this thing called the PACE trial in the UK that was sponsored by the Department of Work and Pensions, and then they used a lot of data that was, in my opinion, falsified or misconstrued. It wasn't up to scientific rigor, basically. And because when they did the PACE trial, they changed their outcomes halfway through the study. So people who started the trial were already deemed recovered before they finished the trial. And the emphasis that they put for recovery was like an 80-year-old man being able to walk down the street. So they changed the outcomes so much to skew the data to make it seem like, well, our study's correct, but really it should have just been thrown out. And the Cochrane had just released a thing stating that, you know, some of this CBT or cognitive behavior therapy use in our condition is not recommended, and there is no data to support it. So there's been a few studies and stuff that have discredited this PACE trial, but unfortunately the UK then used this PACE trial to get patients off benefits. Australia then adapted what the UK had put in place, and unfortunately we got treated the same way here. So,
and that sort of presents quite a problem for a lot of people who are impacted by this condition, as with physicians and counsellors seeing this condition as something that is psychosomatic, as opposed to being something that is impacts or comes from the biology of the human condition. Your beginning with journey with this, when did this happen, or when were you first encountered this situation with yourself, Andrew?
Well, I was studying my bachelor in psychology and sports science, and unfortunately I had a period where I was getting sick for quite a bit. I contracted Epstein-Barr virus, which is also known as glandular fever, but I also had shingles straight after and some gastro. And then I didn't really recover, and I didn't know why. So I just kind of went back to work, back to study, tried to push myself through, because, you know, that's what I'd always been taught when I did fitness stuff is, oh, well, you know, just push through it, you'll get better. And yeah, nothing seemed to work. And then I went and got myself tested with some sleep studies and stuff and blood tests, and nothing was coming up. And eventually this led to the diagnosis of ME, which is, at the moment, it's still a diagnosis of exclusion, because we haven't had enough research to help find a biomarker. So
tell me, what was it like? Let's take that little step back, and that process of you having to find out, or not knowing what you had, and going from, I guess, from one doctor to another doctor. What was going through your emotional space at that time?
Well, it was very frustrating, because some of the doctors and specialists I interacted with kind of thought, or it was kind of implied, I was putting on my symptoms, or like being a hypochondriac. And I was trying to reiterate to them, was like, well, no, I really want to get well. I want to finish my studies. I need to work, you know, let's do this. And unfortunately, I had a really bad experience with the first fatigue clinic that diagnosed me. They said, you know, it's in your mind. We can't find anything, so therefore it must be in your mind. So we're going to give you some high doses of dexamphetamine to give you energy, and we're going to tell you that the condition is all in your head and it must be of some previous trauma you haven't processed, and go off and do some graded exercise therapy and a little bit of exercise, and you'll feel better.
And that process, Andrew, before you were given the ME diagnosis, what was the time frame to that?
Well, I was very lucky. I got diagnosed fairly quickly, so it was within 6 months or so. But I've known other patients with the condition where it took them 20 years to get a diagnosis. And I think the reason, if I'm being blatantly honest, that, you know, I got diagnosed so quickly was because I was a man. And I've seen a lot of women with the condition just instantly dismissed or as being either hysterical or making it up or this kind of thing, simply based on their gender. So I think in that regard, I kind of, because of my gender, I got diagnosed a lot quicker than some of my other peers with ME.
And what impact did having, once you were diagnosed with the condition, how did that impact you with your studies?
Well, it was interesting because I went from a student who was getting like high distinctions in, like, say, forensic psychology, and I was surprisingly good at statistics, which I never really expected when I was doing my psych course. But, you know, I was getting HDs in statistics and that. And then as my condition progressed, I noticed it was harder for me to think, to find the words and put things to paper. And my grades started to slip as well. And then I tried testing myself by going back and doing a first year subject I did really terribly at. I think I only got a passing grade, and then I tried doing a Cert 4 because I was working for a TAFE. And I just couldn't even complete a basic Cert 4 course. So it was very frustrating because everyone said, oh, you know, you're quite intelligent, Andrew, you know how to talk and all of this kind of thing. But like, I felt I wasn't meeting my potential, and I wasn't, like, I was kind of losing who I was in some regards. I kind of prided myself on learning and bettering, and I couldn't keep up with either the physical demands with the fatigue or with the cognitive demands.
And that must have had also impacted on your mental health, because here you were a person who was deemed like a high achieving student and working, to all of a sudden struggling with being able to just get through the basic day.
And unfortunately, the people treating me at the time, although, you know, it was kind of leading to this secondary depression, they were blaming my mental health for why I was being sick, or for why I wasn't achieving as what it's hard to talk about because there was so much gaslighting in the clinic I went to. You know, they in effect kind of re-traumatized me for a lot of issues I had worked through or overcome, because before I even got ME, I did have some mental health stuff, but my psychologist was at the point where she was going to let me go, because she was like, Andrew, we've processed through everything. You're in a really good place now. I don't think there's much benefit for us to continue. But then I went to these fatigue clinics, and then they were saying, well, you must be sick because X, 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 and X happened. You haven't processed that, or this is causing you stress. That's why you're sick. You don't want to get better. So, that's why you're sick. And, these aren't psychologically trained experts telling me this. They're exercise physiologists, and one was like a GP. So they had no consultation with my sleep specialists or with my psychologist, and yet they were kind of re-traumatizing me through a lot of things, trying to find some kind of thing to blame my illness on, because their perspective is, oh, it's a psychological condition, so we need to find the trauma that's causing him not to get well. And in effect, they were re-traumatizing me to the point where my psych said, Andrew, why are we going through this stuff again? We've addressed this. You've gotten over it. Why are these issues coming back up? And, I spoke to my lecturers at Swinburne University and also my psychologists, and they said, look, these clinics shouldn't be doing this. Trying to blame a post-viral illness such as ME on psychology is just ethically and morally what's the word? It's
it's unethical, and it sort of obviously created that situation for you to thinking, what's going on? Here are some people telling me they're thinking one way, and within yourself what's really happening to your body. Going forward, what the day that you realized that things were more difficult and you had to consider support workers, what was that process like to finally think, well, I do need help, I need having support around me?
It got to the point where I had to start cutting back my activities. So I used to be a basketball coach. I used to play basketball. I taught Kung Fu. I was studying full-time at Box Hill, and then, studying full-time at Swinburne and working at at the TAFE. And then each time I kept doing the program because they were telling me to do more and more exercise or to keep up the same level of activity, because if you give up any activity, you'll never get back to it. You'll never be able to do it again. Now, from my perspective, doing sports science and having my qualifications in fitness, when we train an athlete or do weight training with someone, we always have like a rest day so people can get over their delayed muscle onset muscle soreness or whatever. But these programs, they tell you to keep doing something each day with someone that's already heavily fatigued when they should be resting more. So I kept doing this program, and then I ended up I had to drop coaching, and then I dropped playing basketball first, dropped coaching, dropped doing, my Tai Chi and Kung Fu. And it got to the point I even had to drop studies. And I was barely holding on to work. I had to cut from full-time to part-time hours. And I was like, shit, I really need some help. And I tried applying for the DSP and for NDIS. But because I had this label of ME or chronic fatigue syndrome, they said the response from the government was, well, this is a condition you can recover from in 2 years. We also believe it's psychological. we're not going to help you. So it took me a lawyer and 3 years to get onto DSP and the NDIS, and I ended up spending about $20,000 getting reports, seeing people, legal fees, all of this kind of stuff, just to get me to the point where I am now. You know, where I can have support workers, and now I can actually interact and, you know, do interviews and stuff like this. But yeah, it was a pretty traumatic few years, because I ended up losing my home and going through the housing system and all of that. And again, it was the same diagnosis discrimination. They don't recognize ME as a disability, even though we have research in Australia that's quite strong that does say it's a, you know, a biological condition, and it does affect our whole system, not just the psychology. So yeah, it's just a really kind of shit experience, to be honest.
And that would have been that hard journey to have people assisting you and having to, I guess, consider having somebody that you don't know come into your home and assist you with basic tasks. How hard was it to find appropriate support workers that matched your needs?
Well, again, because we face such diagnosis discrimination, a lot of the major, like, disability support working organizations, they don't have any knowledge on ME. A lot of them also follow the outdated government guidelines that it's a psychological condition. So trying to find people that know about the condition and that can help you was extremely hard. I ended up having to use Mabel, and I met Christina through some of the other advocacy work I was doing, and what she was doing. And so she knew a little bit about my condition, or was willing to learn. So I ended up hiring her through Mabel and doing it that way, because like the other modes at the moment, the big orgs don't know how to treat a person with ME, basically, which is really sad.
And now Christina will bring you into the conversation. So tell us a little bit about what you've sort of gained insight into this condition.
Well, it's been a pretty steep learning curve, because we started working on a call for change petition to submit to the Royal Disability Commission, and done a lot of research, like read up on a lot of research. And what's most alarming is how outdated the current guidelines are. Like 20 years. That wouldn't go in any, like with any other condition, disability.
And why is that? I mean, from your research experience, do you think, is it because it was sort of similar to what CF's chronic fatigue syndrome was like in the 80s? And I'm thinking about some of the early years where we had this stereotype misconception that it was sort of almost like that, dare I say it, that sore back syndrome of people going on disability, using it as a platform for an easy way out.
Yeah, interesting. And it's also the fact that so many, doctors, researchers, anyone really, argue that it is psychological. It's not. And I'm at Andrews 3 days a week. And, it's like, it's not in your head. It actually, like, it's physical.
And what sort of helping assist somebody with that this disability, what does that look like? What sort of things do you have to do to help somebody with that particular disability?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to speak about this because like I do help around with things and like a bit of cooking and stuff, but mostly we focus on Andrew's advocacy work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the main thing I'm helping out with.
Mm. But I would imagine also, Andrew, that you have also workers that help with other basic living. Can you maybe elaborate a bit on what sort of needs somebody living with that particular disability needs support with?
Oh, can I just say one thing?
Yep, go for it.
Well, I forgot. I also take him to medical appointments, driving, transport, that sort of thing.
And I guess that would be difficult too, because from before is, Andrew, that you would have been very independent, be able to have that energy to get yourself to all of a sudden be in that kind of state where you just don't have that capacity to put yourself in that position to get yourself. So going back to you, Andrew, now, what are some of the adjustments and adaptations that someone living with this disability requires?
Well, I'm moderate, or towards moderate to severe with the condition. So I'm mostly housebound. So a lot of what my workers do is to help me conserve energy. Because the more energy I can conserve, the more I'll be able to do throughout the day. So Christina helps a lot with that, with cleaning, cooking, caring, writing things for me if I'm struggling because cognitively you can use up a lot of energy as well. And my other workers sometimes assist me with showering or, getting dressed, all this kind of stuff, depending on how much energy I might have in the day. Because today I look fine, but there's some days, and Christina's seen this too, like I can't get out of bed or the couch. So
can you maybe, for people listening to this, trying to get their head around it, what's it like when you are struggling, say, to do a basic thing like having a shower? What does your body feel like at that moment?
So people with my condition, we have a thing called post-exertional malaise, or I think it's called post-exertional neuroimmune exhaustion now. So basically when we do activity or we go above our anabolic threshold, we go into this state of PEM. Now, PEM isn't just feeling tired and fatigued. It comes on with flu-like symptoms. So you'll get sore glands, joints, muscles. Surprisingly, it's almost all the symptoms of COVID. So it was very hard for me to go out and say, oh, do you have any of these symptoms? And I'm like, well, I experience most of these symptoms every day, flu-like symptoms, especially if I do too much activity. So yeah, it's a lot of that. And nausea, I get a lot of nausea when I'm PEMS. So sometimes if I really overdo it, I'll vomit, or I can't keep food down or liquids down. This kind of thing. And Griffith University, they actually did a study on this. They found that, I think it's the TRMC3 receptor or something. It's the receptor that's responsible for putting calcium into our mitochondria to give us energy.
Oh, okay.
For some reason, this receptor in people with ME and CFS is faulty. So it doesn't matter if we up our calcium intake, the receptor is still faulty and it can't transfer that energy into the cell, which means we can't produce ATP molecules, which is the energy molecules. So when a person with ME goes to use energy, they're already using their ATP. ATP gets converted in a normal person, it will go down to ADP, so phosphate or whatever it's called. And then people will rest or sleep, and then it converts back to ATP again because this citric acid cycle is working. In a person with ME, it will go from ATP down to ADP. Now, because the citric acid cycle's faulty, it can't reconvert back to ATP. So we start from ADP, and then that goes to AMP. And now it's really, really hard to build back from the mono molecule to di to tri. So it's a lot of people kind of say it's like having a broken battery. Like you've got an iPhone that doesn't charge to 100%. And then each time you charge it, the charge goes down. So you might only get like a 20% charge out of the battery, but you've used it up, and then the next day you've only got 5% to work with for the next week or so. So
very debilitating. But I thank you so much for really explaining that and kind of validating how it has actually impacted on that molecular level. And it does show that quite clearly there is that genetic component to it, and that's where we look at the evidence base where the faultiness occurs on that level. Now, for people listening and say they want to do something, what do we need to do to make a change so that there is more research in this important area? What can you suggest today that people can do to disrupt this sort of ableist attitude that we have towards this condition?
Well, the main problem is the government's lack of funding to the condition. A lot of the funding in Australia has been misappropriated by certain individuals and have only really gone towards investigating the psychological nature of ME, which really has poor evidence outcomes and poor structure when you look at it. I mean, some of the evidence that they're claiming that ME can be recovered is clinically not significant, if I remember my old stats days. So they can't beat 30%. So basically they can't even beat a placebo, yet they're using this evidence to deny extremely sick people benefits or help, really, because, you know, someone bedbound with ME, they can't even deal with smells or light or sound, or, you know, toilet or wash themselves. So it's really debilitating. So we need the government to put appropriate funding into biological research. We also need the government to update the guidelines, so remove this faulty evidence base from the guidelines and recognize ME as a biological condition, list it on the permanent conditions on the NDIS so people can actually gain access to the NDIS and get the helps they desperately need, and run an information campaign to educate doctors that no, this is not a somatic syndrome. These patients aren't being hypochondriacs and making things up. They need support, and we need biological supports. So I think they're kind of the three main things, but also we need some legal expertise as well. We need community outreach groups to recognize patients with ME have a harder time than people with other disabilities, because it is an invisible disability, to access supports. And we need some of these disability legal services and stuff to say, hey, ME is a real debilitating disability. We need to do something, and we need to help these people get the supports they need, because currently our suicide rate is 8 to 10 times higher than the average population. And a lot of that's to do with a lot of the medical gaslighting and the institutionalized discrimination from governments, both here and in the UK. So.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew and Christina, for that really insightful knowledge and lived experience of ME. And for anyone, for people who are listening and want to get involved, we will put up a few of the links where you can contact Andrew if you have any further information, or you have a partner or a friend, somebody or a relative who is going through that condition and you want to connect with. It's so important that we build up our communities of support so we can take action and really change the way research and provide more funding into this important area. Thank you. And Andrew, again, thank you so much for sharing this. And I would like to remind everyone for International Disability Awareness Day that you do take the time to consider conditions, disabilities like ME, as just because you can't necessarily see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And, you know, consider invisible disabilities is something which, you know, we do really need to address and support our community. Thank you so much, everyone, for this.
Sorry.
Yep, go for it.
Just before we go, I am running a call for change petition to submit to the Disability Royal Commission to investigate the violence, neglect and abuse of people with ME. I'll give the links to Ricky, but if we could get a lot of people to sign on and share their experiences so that we can also share this to the Disability Royal Commission and make some changes, that would be great.
Will do, and that's an important course. I will definitely have the link to that. Thank you.